everyone. My name is Ashlyn Dietz, and you are listening to Panhandle's Problems. Today, I am joined with two special guests. The first being Skylar Patterson, a senior broadcast major at West Texas A&M University. She has been working on a story about the foster care climate in the Texas Panhandle, and she is here to give us some insight about this very topic. Today is November 10th, and I am coming to you from WTAMU. Skylar, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks. Thank you for having me, Ashlyn.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as you said, I am a senior broadcast journalism major here at WT. I'm from Electra, Texas. If you don't know where that is, it's 30 minutes north of Wichita Falls. Super small town. It's okay if you miss it. It doesn't really matter that much. But I originally came here as a theater major. I really wanted to perform, but then I realized that's not where I'm supposed to be. And my whole goal with theater was to talk about rough topics and just kind of give people a voice and talk about things that no one talks about. And after a while of being in theater, I was like, this isn't really where I belong. And so I decided the next best thing was journalism, because not only do I get to write, but I also get to capture those moments, whether it be through video or photography and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay, that's really awesome. Being a broadcast journalism major so far, what kind of topics have you been able to cover that you're passionate about?
So I've gotten to cover quite a few topics just because this is my second year doing broadcast journalism, but I've gotten to write about the mental health awareness and suicide awareness month. I got to talk about events on campus that was going on, as well as giving people resources. I also got to talk about one of my friends. She was an art major. She was doing a piece in the Mary Moody Northern Hall because they normally showcase their students' art. She was doing an art piece based off of her own personal experience with being sexualized and assault and stuff like that. So she ended up making a bunch of clay eyes and putting up in the men's bathroom in Mary Moody Northern Hall. So as soon as they walked into the stall, they were just being stared at by these eyes. And it sounds really creepy, but a lot of guys were like, wow, it really makes you realize how women feel when we sexualize their bodies and just stare at them. And it was super cool to write about, especially since it was a personal experience for her. And then one project I'm working on right now is a 45-minute documentary video where I'm interviewing students from WT about their experience with suicide and mental health.
So like I mentioned in our intro, you are currently working on a story about the foster care climate in the Panhandle. Is this something that you've always been passionate about?
For one, doing this for class, it's multimedia journalism. We had to fill out this paper and kind of pick certain topics, so I picked suicide awareness, the homeless community within Amarillo, and then foster care. So foster care I didn't really notice, I guess, until I was older, because I am technically adopted. I live with my biological mom, but my dad isn't my biological dad, and he legally adopted us. So I've seen a different side of adoption and what it's like to not have one parent, and what it's like to have one parent just leave and not want you at all, or wasn't capable of taking care of you. So after a while, I was like, wow, some kids don't have either parent. Either their parents were going through stuff and just got the kids taken away, or they didn't want to take care of them. So that's when I started looking into adoption and fostering. That's even something I want to do when I end up being a big kid, and getting married and having kids. I want to foster and I want to adopt because I see the pain that these kids go through. And it just makes my heart break because, yes, we adopt from different countries, but people don't realize how bad it is in the U.S., how bad it is even in the Panhandle. It breaks my heart that these kids are having to fight for love. And so that's the main reason why I wanted to talk about this, because people don't really address it that much, honestly.
Mm-hmm. So you say that the foster care situation isn't really ideal in the States and especially in the Panhandle. So based off of your knowledge, what is the situation in the Panhandle right now?
So obviously I didn't start doing research on the Panhandle till recently, but I've noticed since COVID, the number of foster families has decreased, whether that be because of COVID or, these parents have to meet a lot of requirements for the government. And so I interviewed one lady, her name is Kira Holland, and she's from Lubbock, and she talked about the fact that a lot of people don't finish those qualifications, certifications, because it's just so much work. So eventually they end up not doing it. Or another family I interviewed, she was capped out on how many kids she could have because she can only have 6 kids in the house. And so she had adopted 2 of the ones she fostered and already had her own kids, so she couldn't foster anymore for quite a few years. But again, like since COVID, this has decreased. I'm not sure if it has to do with COVID, probably, because everything's going crazy. Again, another family I interviewed, she said she stopped after COVID hit just because she realized, like, okay, I need to be safe and whatnot, even though she wanted to help. I've read a lot of articles that said since there are so many kids, they're sticking them into hotel rooms and churches and even sleeping on office floors. So, like, they don't have a family to go to. And in 2019, it said that there are 3,000 kids in the Panhandle area, and then 600 of those are eligible for adoption in Amarillo. So there's just a lot of kids that are needing help, but not enough families, and it's just crazy to read on and just think about.
From your understanding, why is it so important to get these kids into foster homes?
Something I've noticed since interviewing families is obviously these situations for these kids aren't ideal. Not only like are they having to sleep on hotel floors and churches and office floors, but they're going through a lot because a lot of families get split up, like they get put into foster because drug abuse or like they're being abused or their family just can't take care of them. Kira Holland, who I mentioned earlier, she said some of the kids she fosters, she knows after they get taken away from her, they're just going back into that situation, whether their parents are like alcoholics or abusing drugs or abusing them. Like they're going back into these toxic families and they're not learning how to actually develop as quote unquote normal people. Like they're not getting to learn from their parents or stuff like that, but they're also having to fight for love. They're having to fight to get taken care of. So in my opinion, again, this is an opinion, when someone, especially like foster kids and kids in the adoption process, when they don't have someone to go to, it ends up making them feel like they have to fight for a normal life, but also that they don't really belong.
Like I also know that kids who struggle in the foster system, that affects them the rest of their lives. I know I read a statistic of how only about 3% of foster kids actually make it to college.
Yeah.
A lot don't even graduate from high school, and then that just carries on into their future lives. Do you know any more about what kind of lasting effects this can have on them?
So I haven't read much on that, but it makes sense since they're focused on completely other priorities, like just finding a home and finding parents rather than school and just learning and socializing. I didn't realize this till this past summer, but WT has a program where they allow kids in the foster homes come into WT. I don't know if you know that, but one girl, she had been living in like foster homes and then she was able to get into WT. So I asked her about these living situations and what it was like to go through foster homes, and she didn't really have a good experience. She said that the people were super strict and they didn't really care about her well-being. They were just doing it to get paid.
Oh.
Yeah, and it just kind of blew my mind. I'm like, because some people do abuse the system because the government will pay people to foster these kids, right? Because they need resources. But a lot of people will just abuse that system and they just do it to get paid and they don't really care about the well-being of the child. I know she had a lot of, from what I could tell just by body language, like she was super anxious and lacked confidence and didn't really want to talk to people unless she was spoken to. And it was just hard because I had to reach out to her. And that may have to do with foster care or it may not. But I mean, it would make sense for her to deal with all those emotional effects of foster care. Anytime people go through a crisis in their life or a trial, I'm sure you can agree to this and have maybe some of your own personal experience. But anytime, like, especially if you're a kid, if you're going through all that stuff, it's going to cause some mental issues. And I think that's one thing that people don't really notice within foster care. Like, yeah, they have trouble getting to high school and college, but they're also having these lasting mental effects. Again, it just breaks my heart.
Yeah. So then what does a healthy foster care experience look like, or what should one look like?
This is based off of recent interviews and my own opinions from what I've seen. I'm no expert. I've never actually been through the foster care system. Like, I've never worked for them or anything. But I talked to Stacy Turner. She's the mother of someone I know on campus. She's fostered, I think, 6 kids in the past few years.
Wow.
Yeah, her whole thing was she went through the process of getting everything ready. She had to get a window put into a room because, I don't know if you knew this, in order for a room to be considered a room, it has to have a window for foster care. So she properly did all of that work, and she took care of these kids until they had to be given away. But there are 2 kids, they were siblings, she ended up adopting after fostering. I think that's one way that a foster could be super successful, because she ended up taking these kids in as her own, and they're still living there and from what I've seen from photos and stuff like that, they're really happy. But also another way that a foster can be successful is if the families get better. Like if those kids' parents get better and get back on their feet and the kids get given back, that's also another form of like a successful foster. Either way, once these kids have a home, a firm foundation of a home and a family, that's a really successful fostering.
So I volunteer at this organization called Amarillo Angels, which is based around the foster care system and supports families in foster care. So we have things like love boxes where people can volunteer once a month, like a church group or just a community group can volunteer, and once a month they collect food and clothes and diapers and all these things, and they deliver them to a foster family that they sign up with to support those foster parents, because they're also having to work and raise these kids who, are not their own, along with probably their own kids. So that's something that Amarillo Angels does.
I've also noticed, I read on their page a bit, they do mentoring. Is that correct?
They do, yes.
So can you tell me a bit about that? Because I've looked at the website and I've debated about applying, but I'm curious for audience to know what you know about it.
So from the way I understand the way mentorship works at Amarillo Angels is we have workers that work for Amarillo Angels, and they meet with these youths, with these kids, and they just ensure that they're on the right path and that they are succeeding educationally and just in life. And so yeah, people can volunteer for that. That's another thing they do.
I've also noticed it's not just focused in Amarillo, because that's something I read on the mentoring. Like you can do Amarillo or Canyon or Lubbock, Pampa, Borger, Dumas, and Hereford. So it's just a really good way to get like connected and to help out throughout the Panhandle. So not just Amarillo, which is really cool because like there's these resources and access to help that these kids and families have, which I think is super useful and super needed.
Yeah, so National Angels is where it actually started, and over the course of just years and years, single people or organizations have opened up their own angels in their cities. Gwen Hicks is actually the woman who started Amarillo Angels because she saw the angels in other cities and just felt like that's what we needed in Amarillo and in the Panhandle. And so she's the one who founded Amarillo Angels. And so they're all over the country, and really the main goal is just to offer assistance, just because foster care can be really, really hard and challenging. And obviously, after the pandemic and in everyday life, foster care is lacking, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I also read that Governor Abbott, he called on legislators to provide funding for additional providers capacity, which I thought was really cool, because it's just saying that Texas is trying to do something, whether we realize it or not. And yes, the numbers have decreased, but the fact that Abbott realized that issue and is actually providing it, I think that's a step in the right direction.
For sure. Okay, so obviously the situation in the Panhandle was noticeable enough for the governor to speak out on this. Do you know why it was this year that he spoke out about it?
So there were a couple of different factors that I found out. So for one, the COVID pandemic, obviously it's caused a lot of issues for everyone and everything, but it's hampered with trainings and recruitment. So like I said earlier, these families have to go through a lot of training and have to do a lot of steps before they can even foster. So because of COVID, these opportunities to recruit and to train has decreased because, public safety and whatnot. So this has also made many families reluctant to bring kids into their home, and it's limited a lot of staff and kids who can safely be in a facility at one time. But also due to COVID, there's delays in court hearings. Like court hearings already take a while, but because of COVID, it's taking longer. And so you normally have to have like court hearings for like adoption and fostering and stuff like that. And so home studies and other stops on the path to a permanent home have left more kids staying in foster care longer than they normally do. But aside from COVID, there's also new requirements and regulations requiring time and resources for compliance that have been put on organizations that provide foster care services. So already on top of all the regulations and stuff, they're making new rules. They're making new requirements. So of course that's going to scare families a bit, because like you look at this big heap of requirements and you're like, oh, didn't realize this was so much work. This is going to take too long and too many resources to actually do it. So it would make sense as to why families back out from it, but also organizations and many employers are struggling to hire and to retain fully qualified workers. who can provide these services needed by kids who experience severe trauma and stuff like that. Because even with trauma kids, you have to get a lot of training. Like, we have students who go to college for quite a few years just to be able to counsel and help trauma kids, and like, they have to go through so many steps. If you haven't gone through those steps, it's going to make it a lot harder to continue.
So would you ever consider doing foster care?
For one, I'm a very empathetic person. That's my number one strength. So I keep imagining what it would be like to be in the foster care system. Seeing your family broken apart. Seeing, like, your mom or dad not being able to take care of you or not want to take care of you. Like, I'm just trying to picture myself in that situation. Like, how would that shape me as a person, or how would I react to that? You know, it would completely change my life, because I had a mom and a dad who wanted to take care of me, thankfully. And so that's going to impact how I grow up. So I can't imagine what it's like for those kids, especially the younger ones who don't know what, like, went wrong or don't know what they did wrong, you know? But also, like, thinking of it in a sense, I want to foster. Reading up more about it, this is a lot of steps. This is going to take a lot of time. It's not just I'm going to apply and get some kids and take care of them and whatnot. There's requirements, there's training, you have to make sure your house is in shape. And just looking at it now after doing research, I'm like, okay, if I want to do this, I have to be committed. I have to have a heart for it. I can't just go in expecting it to be easy. I have to go in knowing it's going to be complicated, but it's also going to be so worthwhile.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and sharing your insight about the foster care in the Panhandle.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Up next, we have Savante Wallace, a former Amarillo Angels case manager and a WT Social Studies alum. Savante, first of all, welcome. It's great to have you on the show. I'm really excited about all the insight you will bring, especially what with being a former Amarillo Angels case manager. So, can you tell us the difference between foster care and adoption?
Great question. So foster care is more of a temporary placement. It's with hopes of reunification with the Texas Department of Family Protective Services. Our whole goal is always reunification because we believe the best placement for the child is with their biological parents or family members. Adoption is something that happens when it's more permanent. So it's when a child can't go home for various reasons. And so those are the main differences between fostering and adoption.
You put that really well. So my follow-up question is, why do some kids end up in foster care?
The whole reason is safety and well-being. So obviously we want kids to be safe, and then for whatever reason, that can be neglect, that can be abuse, that could be any trauma that they've experienced. If the child is not safe and that's a question, then that's why they are removed from the home.
Yeah, so foster care is a really, really important thing in our society, and it's really crucial for these kids, which leads me to a question I discussed with Skylar previously. What are the qualifications to becoming foster parents?
So there's a lot of, that's kind of a loaded question. There's a lot of different requirements, but you will work with the CPA, which is a child placement agency, and they work alongside you to make sure that you have, background checks to make sure that you're safe and equipped people. They do home checks just to make sure your home is safe for a child, whatever age. I don't know every single detail about what's expected, but the CPA, Child Placement Agency, will work alongside you to do that.
Skylar and I addressed this earlier, but I think you and your knowledge and your experience, you might have another answer as well for us. So with your experience and with your knowledge, have the number of foster care homes in the Panhandle changed at all recently?
I think, yes, the numbers have changed. And I think primarily COVID has affected so much of everything. We can't even get, food. So it's just affected so many things. And children were at home with their families for a really long time during COVID when school wasn't in. And so parents are not used to being at home with their kids that long. And so there was no support for them. They were struggling with their own things. And so that led to a lot more cases, a lot more of CPS being involved with neglect and things that, you wouldn't normally see when parents are not used to being at home constantly with their families 24/7. And so, yeah, it has changed for sure. And that's just one of the reasons.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so just to clarify, I already said you worked at Amarillo Angels. When did you work for Amarillo Angels, and What was your role there exactly? I know I said case manager, but that's kind of maybe a foreign word for some people.
I worked for Emerald Angels for about 6 months, and my role was I was a case manager. And so Emerald Angels was a supporting agency, so we didn't do foster care specifically like the CPAs that I mentioned before. We support the families once they've already begun the fostering process. And so I worked primarily with volunteers who support families through two programs. One is the Love Box program and the Dare to Dream program. And what we have found is that foster families stop fostering within the first year, and that's because they don't feel supported. And so it's a national organization that started in Austin, and then one of our executive directors, Gwen Hicks, started it here. So really the Love Box program is a conduit to relationships because we want to make sure that those families feel supported. And so I just supported the people who supported the families. And so that was my primary role there.
Yeah, so we've already discussed this on our podcast earlier, just the beauty that is Amarillo Angels as an organization. It's a really, really good organization. I can't highlight that enough. And so what was your personal experience working with Amarillo Angels as a case manager?
Yeah, I loved Emerald Angels. It was my first, job, career outside of college. And so it was a really good entry. I learned so much about foster care. I never even thought I would be doing foster care, but just through really just the path that it led me to, I had great experiences. And so Emerald Angels is really an amazing organization. They're new and upcoming, but they're so vital to our community. And so Gwen Hicks, who is the executive director, and she is just phenomenal, and she really does care about people. And so I had an amazing experience with Emerald Angels.
That's awesome. So where are you working now?
I'm currently at Region 16. I'm their family services specialist for the top 26 counties in the Panhandle. It's kind of crazy. I have 10 sites that I work with, and then I have 4 regional sites and 6 sites here in Amarillo, but really I just support FSAs, which are family service assistants, and they just support the families in a different way. And so if you know anything about Region 16, to qualify, you're either homeless, in foster care, or below the poverty line, or have some sort of disability. And so if you meet those requirements, that just shows us that there's a lot of needs that those families have. And so those assistants really start to provide any resource, any education, anything that we have offered in Amarillo. So that's primarily what I do.
That's great. I'm so glad you get to do that because I know you as a person, you're just so gifted in that area, and I know that you're doing a great job. So I just have a couple more questions. I'm really interested to hear, what was the hardest part working in foster care for you?
I think for me, it's just that you don't really get to see the outcome every single time. Either you're in the beginning or you're in the middle, or sometimes you're in the end. And so sometimes, it may be great and you see a kid who gets placed in a great home or maybe not a good home, and you just never know what happens afterwards. And so I think that is the hardest part for me, is I'm only needed for a certain part of the process in foster care.
So then the opposite of that question, what was the most rewarding part for you?
The most rewarding, really most of my time was spent at Emerald Angels. And so the rewarding thing for me is just getting to hear stories from real families. I think when I was in school, it was all like hypothetical situations and theories, but when you get into the work and you see real people with real needs and real struggles, it just really helps you to see the need in our community, as well as, just the light that Emerald Angels had in our community. Probably my second week at Emerald Angels, our executive director called me and said, "Hey, we have a young man who's coming to WT and he doesn't have anything. So would you be willing to go shop for him?" So I got $500 that someone donated, and I got to buy him everything that he needed for his dorm, snacks, toiletries, and then we got to deliver that to him. And just the look on his face when he saw all of these things in the car, and he was like, "This is all for me." Like, people in the community love me. And so I think that was just really encouraging for me, that it really does make a difference, even those small things that, I wouldn't normally think of a person who has those things. So.
Okay, Savante, well, that just about wraps up our time. Do you have any final words?
No. Well, there's one thing. Foster families are needed in our community. There's so many kids that are having to be, transported to the Metroplex area, different bigger cities, just because there's not enough homes. And so we really do want to keep our kids in our communities. That's the one thing that they have that stays the same. And so if you are thinking about fostering or you're interested, there's so many CPAs in our community to learn more about.
Okay, well, thank you, Savante, so much for being on the show and for contributing your insight. It was great to have you.
Cool.
This has been Panhandle's Problems. I'm your host, Ashlyn Dietz, and we'll see you next time.
That's from you.